When a faithless businessman promises to turn his mansion into a home for a street girl with inexplicable gifts, he doesn't realize that this promise will make him a prisoner of himself. The hum of the motorized wheelchair echoed along the stone paths of Brookside Park. Edward Morgan, 47, president of one of the country's largest holding companies, adjusted his Italian suit as he moved between Columbus's century-old trees. His expression, always serious and calculated, seemed carved from cold marble. The meeting scheduled for that morning had been cancelled at the last minute, leaving him with time he didn't know how to fill. Free time was something Edward avoided like a contagious disease. His driver, Anthony, waited in the parking lot. Edward had dismissed his company for the park stroll, something rare. In the 4 years since the helicopter accident that left him without the use of his legs, Edward rarely spent time alone. Not due to physical necessity, but because of the constant demands of his position. Phones always ringing, assistants always running, decisions always pending. The cool Columbus wind tousled his grey hair as he observed the park's lake. On it, families fed ducks, couples walked hand in hand, elderly people practiced Tai Chi. Scenes from a life he no longer understood, that seemed as distant as photographs from a foreign country. The accident hadn't just stolen his movements, but also his ability to feel anything beyond ambition and pragmatism. The wheelchair advanced along a less frequented path where the city noise seemed more distant. That's when he spotted, under an old oak tree, an improvised structure. It looked like a child's stand made from stacked crates, colorful cloths, and a faded umbrella serving as a roof. In front, a sign written in blue pen with childish handwriting, "Miracles for $1." Edward stopped, intrigued not by the sign itself. He had seen stranger things in the corporate world, but by the child who was there. A girl of approximately 10 years old, with dark curly hair tied in messy braids, sitting on the ground with her legs crossed. She wore a simple saffron-colored dress and was barefoot. What caught his attention most, however, was her expression. Serene, almost adult-like, incongruous with her apparent age. The girl didn't look at him immediately. She continued braiding what appeared to be colorful bracelets with wool threads and plastic beads, as if that activity required all her concentration. Beside her, a small cardboard box with a few coins. Edward moved closer until the shadow of his chair reached the improvised miracle office. "How much does a real miracle cost?" he asked, with a tone that mixed curiosity and sarcasm. The girl finally raised her eyes. They were brown deep, of a kind that seemed to see beyond appearances. $1, mister," she answered simply, not intimidated by the expensive suit or the motorized wheelchair. "All miracles cost the same. Even the impossible ones." "There are no impossible miracles. Only people who don't believe in them," she replied, turning her attention back to the bracelets she was making. Edward couldn't suppress a short, dry laugh. Something about that child disconcerted him. It wasn't fear, it wasn't pity, feelings he knew well in people's gazes. It was something different, as if she saw him completely. "What's your name?" he asked, adjusting his posture in the chair. "Lily," she answered, not raising her eyes this time. "And you're Edward Morgan. I saw your picture in the magazine my aunt reads." The mention of his name took him by surprise. His face appeared frequently in business magazines, but it was strange to be recognized by a child, especially one who seemed to live on the margins. "What are you doing here alone?" "I'm not alone," Lily answered, pointing to the park around them. "I'm with all of them, and now with you too." Edward observed the park again. People continued their lives, oblivious to this conversation, to this girl. "Where are your parents?" "My mom works in houses. Today she's far away at the Graysons' house on the other side of the city. I go home when the sun sets behind that building." She pointed to a building that rose on the park's edge. "And they let you here, selling miracles?" There was a hint of indignation in his voice. "Nobody lets me, mister. I come because I want to, and I don't sell miracles. I just help find the ones that already exist." Edward felt something strange in response to her answer, a restlessness he hadn't experienced in a long time. He looked at his watch, a Patek Philippe worth enough to buy a small apartment in that city. He had time, and more importantly, He had a curiosity he couldn't name. "And what kind of miracle do you think I need?" he asked, leaning slightly in his chair. Lily finally put the bracelets aside. She stood up in a graceful movement and approached him. Their eyes leveled, she standing, he sitting in the chair. "You need to walk again," she said, "but not with your legs." The answer left him disconcerted, not because of the mention of his physical condition. He was already used to that, but because of the way she spoke, as if she saw beyond, as if she knew a pain that he himself refused to admit. "My legs haven't worked since the accident," he answered dryly. "The spinal cord was damaged. There is no cure for this. There's always a way, mister. We just need to be willing to follow it." Something in that phrase, spoken with an almost childish simplicity, irritated him deeply. Perhaps it was the distant echo of the dozens of doctors he had seen, the experimental treatments he had tried, the empty promises he had heard. "You don't know what you're talking about," he replied, more sharply than he intended. Lily wasn't intimidated. She moved even closer, and without asking permission, placed a small warm hand on his. The unexpected touch made Edward start. "You have a big empty house. I have a full heart and a small house. We can trade." The proposal, as absurd as it was unexpected, drew from Edward something he hadn't done in a long time, a genuine laugh. "You want my house in exchange for a miracle?" he asked, both amused and curious. "I don't want your house, mister. I want you to remember what it's like to have a home." The subtle distinction caught him off guard. Edward was about to respond when he felt something, a slight tingling in his legs, as if someone were passing a feather over the numb skin, a sensation that, according to the doctors, would be impossible with the type of injury he had suffered. "What are you doing?" he asked, a note of alarm in his voice. "Nothing," Lily replied, stepping back. "Just reminding your body what it's like to feel." Edward shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The tingling persisted, climbing up his legs to his waist. It wasn't pain, it wasn't exactly pleasure. It was presence. His legs, which for years had been merely useless appendages he carried, were making themselves noticed. "Is this some kind of trick?" he asked, his voice betraying the disturbance he felt. "I don't do tricks, mister. I just help remember." Edward looked around, seeking some rational explanation. The park continued its normal rhythm. No one was observing this strange scene, just him and Lily, under the oak tree, with a miracle sign between them. "If you heal," he began hesitantly, the words coming out before he could evaluate them. "This house will be yours too." The words hung in the air like an unexpected verbal contract. Edward didn't know why he had said them. Perhaps it was the loneliness, perhaps the silent desperation that even he no longer recognized, or perhaps it was just the absurdity of the situation, which allowed an equally absurd proposal. Lily smiled, a simple and luminous smile. "You'll give me a home because you'll want to, not because you promise now." She bent down, picked up one of the bracelets she had finished, and offered it to him. It was blue and green, colors that reminded Edward of the sea he hadn't visited since the accident. $1, she said, extending an open hand. Edward took his Italian leather wallet and removed a $100 bill. "Keep the change," he said, extending the bill. Lily shook her head. "Miracles cost $1, mister. No more, no less." Intrigued, Edward searched his pockets until he found a coin. He handed it to the girl, who carefully deposited it in the cardboard box. In exchange, she tied the bracelet on his right wrist, with delicate movements. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Edward," she said, as if scheduling a business meeting. Edward didn't respond. He turned the chair and went back the way he had come, feeling the strange tingling in his legs and the even stranger weight of the colorful bracelet on his wrist. For the first time in years, something had diverted his attention from the world, of numbers and strategies he had built around himself, something simple and inexplicable, something that perhaps could be called hope. As he moved away, he didn't see Lily watching him with eyes that seemed to know not only the present, but also the future that awaited them. A future that would change both in ways that neither could imagine at that moment. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from, We continue. The next morning dawned with a typical Columbus fog, enveloping the tallest buildings downtown in a white, diffuse embrace. Edward woke up before the alarm, something that hadn't happened in years. He felt different, an unusual energy coursing through his body. The tingling in his legs persisted, like a low-intensity electrical current. He sat up in bed and, on impulse, touched his own knees. He expected the usual sensation, nothing, just the touch recognized by his hands, but not by his legs. To his surprise, he felt a slight warmth, a timid response from nerves that, according to all specialists, would never function again. Impossible, he murmured to himself, withdrawing his hand as if he had touched something forbidden. He looked at the colorful bracelet on his wrist. During the night, he could easily have removed it, but something had stopped him. A superstition that didn't match his rational personality, a hope he didn't allow himself to feel. Ruth, the housekeeper who had worked for him for more than a decade, entered the room carrying the breakfast tray. Her eyes immediately noticed the colorful bracelet. "New gift, boss?" she asked, while arranging the pillows so he could have his coffee. "Not exactly," Edward replied evasively. "Just a memento." Ruth was a woman of almost 60, with grey hair always tied in a perfect bun and eyes that seemed to hold secrets of the world. She had worked for Edward since before the accident and was the only employee who dared to treat him with respectful informality. "You seem different today," she commented, serving the strong black coffee he preferred. "More alive." Edward ignored the comment. He picked up the tablet on the bedside table and began checking emails, stock quotes, the day's news. The morning routine that kept his mind occupied, preventing it from wandering to dangerous places like feelings, memories, or hopes. "Cancel my appointments this morning," he said, without raising his eyes from the screen. Ruth raised her eyebrows, surprised. In 4 years, Edward had never cancelled appointments without an imperative reason. "All of them, sir?" "Yes, all of them. I need to resolve a personal matter." The word personal sounded strange even to his own ears. What personal matters would a man like him have, whose relationships were limited to contracts, agreements, and occasionally strategic encounters with women as emotionally disconnected as himself? An hour later, his motorized chair was again crossing the paths of Brookside Park. The fog had already dissipated, revealing an intensely blue sky, rare for that time of year. Edward felt his heart racing, an adolescent anxiety he hadn't experienced since his college days, when he still believed the world could be conquered by sheer willpower. Upon reaching the oak tree, however, an unpleasant surprise awaited him. The place where Lily had set up her office was empty. No sign of the crates, the colorful cloths, or the miracle sign. No sign of the girl with the deep gaze and disconcerting words. Edward felt a pang of disappointment that deeply irritated him. It was absurd to feel this way because of a child who sold miracles in a park. Absurd to believe, even for an instant, that something extraordinary could happen. He approached the trunk of the oak tree, looking for any indication that Lily had been there, that she wasn't just a daydream born of his loneliness. That's when he noticed, stuck between the knotty roots of the tree, a small colorful object. It was another bracelet, similar to the one he wore, but in shades of red and orange. Beside it, a note written in the same childish handwriting as the sign, "I'll return when the sun sets." Edward took the bracelet and the note, putting them in his jacket pocket. Part of him wanted to ignore this, to return to his office, to the ordered world of spreadsheets and contracts, but another part, one he thought he had suffocated long ago, insisted on staying, on waiting. "Can I help you, mister?" asked a voice beside him. Edward turned, expecting to find Lily. Instead, he saw an elderly lady who was selling corn for the lake's ducks. "I'm looking for a girl," he replied. "Curly hair, saffron-colored dress. She was here yesterday, selling things." The lady smiled, revealing the absence of some teeth. "Ah, the miracle girl," she said, as if speaking of a folkloric figure. "She appears and disappears. Nobody knows where she comes from or where she goes. Does she live around here?" They say yes in those communities near the river. Others say she lives with her grandmother somewhere downtown, but nobody knows for sure. Edward felt a growing frustration. How was it possible that, in the 21st century, with all surveillance technologies and social media, a child could be such a complete mystery? Does she do this frequently? Sell miracles? The old woman shrugged. She appears from time to time. Some say she has a gift. Others think she's just a clever girl trying to earn some coins. She paused and leaned in, as if to share a secret. But I've already seen strange things happen after people talk to her. Things that have no explanation. Edward wanted to ask more, but his phone rang. It was Marcus, his assistant, reporting a crisis in one of the group's companies, something related to an SEC investigation that had leaked to the press. The real world was calling, demanding his attention, his pragmatism, his calculated coldness. Reluctantly, Edward said goodbye to the lady and directed his chair back to the parking lot, where Anthony awaited him with the car. During the journey to the office, in Columbus's financial center, he tried to concentrate on the problem he would have to solve, but his mind insisted on returning to the park, to Lily, to the persistent tingling in his legs. At the office, the expected crisis was unfolding in all its glory. Press advisors running, lawyers discussing strategies, nervous executives awaiting guidance. Edward immersed himself in the situation with the efficiency that had made him famous in the corporate world. In a few hours, he had outlined a plan to contain the damage, delegated specific tasks, and prepared an official statement that, without admitting any irregularity, promised full cooperation with the authorities. It was during one of these meetings that the first episode occurred. Edward was presenting his plan when suddenly he felt an involuntary contraction in his right leg, a clear visible spasm that made everyone in the room freeze in silent shock. "Mr. Morgan, are you okay?" asked Marcus, breaking the awkward silence. Edward looked at his own leg, incredulous. The spasm passed, but the sensation remained, a pulse of life in limbs that for years had been merely dead weight. "I'm fine," he replied, trying to maintain composure. "Let's continue." But the episode had left everyone shaken. In the eyes of his subordinates, Edward saw something he wasn't used to seeing directed at him: hope, and that somehow disturbed him more than the spasm itself. At the end of the day, when the sun was beginning to set on the Columbus horizon, Edward dismissed Anthony and, to everyone's surprise, announced that he would return home alone. Something he hadn't done since the accident. "But sir, how—" began Marcus, concerned. "My motorized chair is perfectly capable of traveling a few blocks," interrupted Edward, "and I want to enjoy the late afternoon." Without giving further explanations, he left the building and directed his chair not to his mansion in the city outskirts, but back to Brookside Park. The sky was tinged with orange and pink, colors that strangely matched the bracelet he had found earlier. Upon reaching the oak tree, he felt a mixture of relief and anxiety to see that Lily was there. Her office had been set up again, and she was sitting in the same place, this time reading a worn book that seemed too big for her small hands. "You came back," she said, without raising her eyes from the book. "You said we would see each other." "Today," Edward replied, approaching. Lily finally closed the book and looked at him with those eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. "You felt it, didn't you? Your legs remembering how to exist." Edward hesitated. Part of him, the rational, skeptical part, hardened by years of ruthless business, wanted to deny, wanted to find a medical explanation for what was happening. But another part, one that grew with each hour, wanted to believe. "I had a spasm today," he finally admitted. "Something that doctors said would be impossible with the type of injury I have." Lily smiled, a serene smile that illuminated her childish face. "It's not the legs that are healing, Mr. Edward. It's you." The statement, as simple as it was enigmatic, left him without response. Edward looked at his own legs, which for years had been merely useless parts of his body, and for the first time felt that they were still part of him. "How do you know my full name?" he asked suddenly. "People talk about you. They say you're important, that you're rich, that you're tough. They say you weren't always like this." Edward felt a shiver. Who would talk about him to a street child? "And do you believe what they say?" Lily tilted her head, thoughtful. "I believe what I see, and what I see is a man who forgot how to feel." The response hit him like a punch to the stomach. It was true. Since the accident, since the loss of his parents years earlier, since the cold boarding schools of childhood, Edward had built layers upon layers of protection around himself, until one day the armor became so heavy that he no longer knew how to live without it. "What do you want from me, Lily?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. "I don't want anything, mister. It's you who came looking for me." Edward looked around. The park was beginning to empty. Families were returning to their homes, athletes were collecting their equipment, couples were seeking more intimate places to continue their encounters. Soon only the two of them would remain under the oak tree. "Do you have somewhere to spend the night?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. Lily pointed to a vague direction beyond the park. "My aunt lives just over there." "And your parents?" A heavy silence followed the question. Lily lowered her eyes and for a moment seemed just what she was, a small and vulnerable child. "My mother left when I was a baby. My father, he had to go to a distant place." Edward felt a pang of compassion, a feeling he thought he had forgotten how to experience. "Come with me," he said impulsively. "I have a big empty house, as you said yourself. I can offer you a room, hot food, clothes." Lily looked at him with disconcerting seriousness. "Are you inviting me because you feel sorry for me, or because you want me to continue making miracles?" The question, so direct, caught him off guard. Edward was used to dealing with adults who masked their intentions with polite words, who danced around the truth without ever touching it. Lily's raw honesty was refreshing and, at the same time, uncomfortable. "I don't know," he admitted, with a sincerity that surprised himself. "Maybe both." Lily smiled, seeming satisfied with the answer. "You're more honest than you think," she said, standing up and beginning to collect her belongings. The book, some unfinished bracelets, the box with coins. "But you're still not ready." "Ready for what?" "For a real miracle." Lily finished putting everything in a worn backpack and approached him. With the naturalness of someone who has known someone for years, she extended her hand and touched his face, a gesture so unexpected that Edward didn't have time to pull back. "Tomorrow you will walk," she said, with the quiet certainty of someone announcing that the sun will rise. "You'll take 3 steps, and then you'll be afraid." Before Edward could respond, Lily turned and ran toward the park exit, her small figure disappearing among the trees and the last visitors who still remained. Edward remained still, his hand touching the spot where the girl's fingers had been, an absurd promise echoing in his mind, a promise that, against all logic, against all medical experience, against all reason, he wanted to believe. On the bracelet on his wrist, the sea colors seemed to glow with their own light in the twilight that enveloped the park. And in his legs, the tingling continued, as if each dormant nerve was slowly awakening from a long sleep. Edward's mansion was located in Highland Heights, one of Columbus's most exclusive neighborhoods. It was a modern construction, all glass and concrete, designed by a famous architect years before the accident. The original design called for floating staircases and different levels, elements that Edward had ordered adapted after losing the movement in his legs. The result was a functional house, but one that had lost part of its personality in the process, as if the construction itself had been forced to adjust to a new reality that wasn't part of its nature. That night, Edward couldn't sleep. Lily's words echoed in his mind like an obsessive mantra. "Tomorrow you will walk. You'll take 3 steps and then you'll be afraid." Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the girl's serene face, her eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets, her quiet certainty when making a promise that defied all medical logic. Around 3 in the morning, he gave up trying to sleep. Using his strong arms developed by years of adaptation to the wheelchair, he transferred himself to the chair and moved to the bedroom's balcony. The Columbus sky was exceptionally clear, sprinkled with stars that seemed close enough to touch. The tingling in his legs had increased, becoming almost uncomfortable. It wasn't pain. Edward almost wished it were, as pain would be something familiar, something that doctors could explain. It was life returning to long dormant parts, like water flowing again through dry channels. At 5 in the morning, No longer able to bear the anxiety, Edward picked up the phone and called Richard Mills, his personal physiotherapist. "I need you to come now," he said, not caring about the hour or explanations. Richard, accustomed to the eccentricities of his richest client, simply agreed. 40 minutes later, he was at the mansion, still with sleepy eyes and disheveled hair. "What happened, Edward?" he asked, while preparing the equipment for the session. "Any pain?" "Not exactly," Edward replied hesitantly. How to explain what he was feeling without sounding like a lunatic? "I've been experiencing some sensations in my legs, tingling, spasms." Richard frowned, intrigued. In 4 years of treatment, he had never heard Edward report something like this. "When did this start?" "Yesterday," Edward replied, deliberately omitting the mention of Lily. "It was gradual." Richard began examining Edward's legs with precise, professional movements. He tested reflexes, sensitivity, muscle tone. With each test, his countenance became more perplexed. "This is extraordinary," he murmured after a few minutes. "There's a neuromuscular response that wasn't present in your last evaluation. It's minimal, but definitely there." Edward felt his heart race. So it wasn't imagination, it wasn't wishful thinking, it wasn't a child's suggestion manipulating his desperate mind. Something was really happening. "What does this mean?" he asked, trying to control the hope growing in his chest. Richard shook his head, confused. "I can't say for sure. In theory, with the type of injury you suffered, this shouldn't be possible, but there are documented cases of inexplicable partial recoveries, usually years after the initial trauma. Is there any chance I could walk again?" Richard hesitated, aware of the danger of feeding false hopes. Science would say no, but medicine is full of cases that defy science. I prefer not to give a definitive verdict now. The physiotherapist's cautious response didn't diminish the certainty growing inside Edward. Lily's words, "Tomorrow you will walk," seemed more real than any medical diagnosis. After the session, which extended longer than usual, Edward asked Richard to return the next day. The physiotherapist agreed, visibly intrigued by the case that seemed to defy everything he had learned in years of training. "Is there something you're not telling me?" said Richard, while putting away his equipment. "Something that might explain this sudden change?" Edward thought of Lily, of the improvised miracle office in the park, of the colorful bracelet he still wore on his wrist. He considered telling everything, but something stopped him. The story would sound absurd, childish, worthy of a man on the verge of insanity, not the president of one of the country's largest holding companies. "Nothing relevant," he lied, adjusting his position in the chair. "Perhaps just time doing its work." Richard didn't insist, but his look said he wasn't convinced. As soon as the physiotherapist left, Edward called Ruth, the housekeeper. He needed to prepare for the day, for the meetings that awaited him, for the normal life that continued despite the silent revolution occurring in his body. "You seem excited today," commented Ruth, while helping him choose a suit. "I had a good night," Edward replied, choosing the navy blue suit he reserved for special occasions. "Going to celebrate something?" The innocent question made Edward smile. "Maybe, Ruth. Maybe." The morning passed with torturous slowness. Edward participated in teleconferences, signed documents, made million-dollar decisions with the same efficiency as always. But his mind was far away in Brookside Park, under the oak tree where Lily had promised a miracle. Around noon, he could no longer bear the wait. He dismissed the afternoon meetings and announced that he would go out alone again. This time, not even Marcus dared to question. There was something different about Edward, an energy that emanated from him like heat, making him even more intimidating. The path to the park never seemed so long. Edward felt his heart beating strongly against his chest, his hands sweating on the control of the motorized chair. It was like being a teenager again, anxious for a date with his first girlfriend, except that, in this case, the date was with a mysterious child, and the expectation was for something that science said was impossible. Upon reaching the oak tree, he found the place empty again. No sign of Lily or her office. The disappointment was like a physical blow, painful and immediate. Edward looked around, searching for any indication of the girl. Nothing. That's when he noticed, attached to the trunk of the tree, another note written in childish handwriting. "Look up." Edward raised his eyes and saw her. Lily was sitting on one of the lower branches of the oak tree, her legs swinging carelessly in the air. She wore the same saffron-colored dress, but had added a crown of wildflowers over her curly hair. "You came," she said with a smile that illuminated her face. "You said I would walk today," Edward replied without preamble. "That's why I'm here." Lily descended from the branch with the agility of a cat, landing softly on the grass. She approached Edward, her eyes fixed on his with an almost uncomfortable intensity. "Do you believe you will walk?" The question was simple but loaded with meaning. Edward hesitated. Did he really believe? Or was he just following a desperate impulse, the last card of a man who had already tried everything that modern medicine offered? "I don't know," he answered, honestly. "But I want to believe." Lily smiled, seeming satisfied with the answer. "It's a start." She extended her small hands and held Edward's, larger and more calloused. The touch was warm, alive, energetic in a way he couldn't explain. "Close your eyes," she asked, "and remember how it was to walk. Not just the movement, but the sensation, the freedom, the purpose." Edward obeyed, feeling ridiculous but also strangely hopeful. He closed his eyes and let his mind wander to the past, to the days when walking was as natural as breathing. He remembered running on the beach in Myrtle Beach, where he had spent childhood summers, climbing mountains in the Alps during college, dancing at weddings, parties, clubs, movements that were once part of who he was and that later became just distant memories. "Now," Lily's voice sounded close to his ear, "stand up." Edward opened his eyes, staring at the girl with incredulity. "It's impossible. My legs don't—" "Stand up," Lily repeated with surprising authority for someone so small. Something in her voice, in the way her eyes didn't allow doubts, made Edward try. Supporting himself on the chair's arms, he made an effort to raise his body. The legs, useless for so long, trembled with the effort. And then it happened. Slowly, hesitantly, Edward rose. His legs supported his weight, trembling but firm. He was standing for the first time in 4 years, with no support beyond his own strength. The sensation was indescribable. Something between pain and ecstasy, between fear and euphoria. It was like being born again, like existing completely once more. Lily took a step back, creating space. "Now, come to me," she invited, extending her hands. Edward hesitated. Being on his feet was already miracle enough. Walking seemed like asking too much of fate. "I can't," he murmured, feeling his legs tremble under the body's weight. 3 steps, insisted Lily. "That's what I promised. 3 steps today, more tomorrow, more after." Edward took a deep breath. The park around seemed to have silenced, as if nature itself were holding its breath to witness this moment. Slowly, with monumental effort, Edward moved his right leg. The movement was awkward, more of a drag than a step, but it was real. 1. The sensation was strange, as if he were relearning something forgotten centuries ago. His muscles, atrophied from disuse, protested, but they responded. They responded. Another movement, this time with the left leg, more coordinated, more confident. 2. Lily was 1 step away, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and expectation. Edward felt a wave of emotion cross him, gratitude, hope, fear, all mixed in a whirlwind that threatened to engulf him. The 3rd step was the hardest, not because of the pain or the physical effort, but because of what it represented. It was a step outside the identity he had built over the last 4 years, out of the armor of coldness and pragmatism that had protected him. It was a step toward the unknown. 3. Edward reached Lily, his hands finding her small hands at the exact moment his legs gave way. He fell to his knees, the impact cushioned by the soft grass. The tears came without warning, without control, like a dam breaking after years of contained pressure. Lily said nothing. She simply held his hands, allowing the moment to exist in its fullness. It was then that Edward realized they weren't alone. A man with a cell phone in his hand was recording the scene from a discreet distance. Other passers-by had stopped to observe, some with expressions of shock, others with emotional smiles. "Who is that?" asked Edward, pointing to the man with the cell phone. Lily shrugged. "People are always looking. Some see, others just observe." The enigmatic response didn't satisfy Edward, but he was too emotional to insist. With Lily's help, he sat back in the chair, though something inside him screamed that he didn't need it anymore, that he could try again, take more steps, really walk. "The fear will come tonight," said Lily, as if reading his thoughts, "and tomorrow too. It's part of the path." "What fear?" asked Edward, confused. "The fear that it's temporary, that the pain will return, that people won't believe, that you yourself won't believe." Lily paused, looking at him with that ancient wisdom. That didn't match her age, but mainly the fear that it's real. The words hit Edward like a revelation. It was true. The possibility that the miracle was real, that he could walk again, that his life could completely change, was as frightening as the possibility that it was just a cruel illusion. "What happens now?" he asked, suddenly feeling lost. Lily smiled, a smile that mixed sadness and joy. "Now you take me home." "To my home?" Edward clarified, surprised by the change in attitude. "Yes," Lily replied. "For now." The simplicity of the response, the absence of explanations or conditions, disconcerted Edward. He was used to complex negotiations, to hidden interests, to ulterior motives. Lily's naturalness was refreshing and at the same time deeply disturbing. "Just like that? You simply come with me?" "You promised your house, remember?" Lily replied with disconcerting simplicity. "If I healed you, your house would be mine too. You're beginning to heal. Now I need a place to stay." Edward vaguely remembered the promise made the day before, words spoken between sarcasm and desperation. He never imagined they would be taken seriously. "Lily, I can't just take a child home. There are laws, procedures. People would ask." "Who would ask?" interrupted Lily, tilting her head. "You live alone in a house that's too big. Your trusted people won't ask questions, and as for the rest of the world, they only see what they want to see." There was a strange logic in her argument, one that went against all the social, legal, and ethical norms that Edward knew. And yet, he felt inclined to agree. Perhaps it was gratitude for what had just happened. Perhaps it was the inexplicable connection he had felt from the first moment. Or perhaps it was just the fatigue of a life half-lived. "For how long?" he finally asked. "For as long as necessary," Lily replied enigmatically. "Until we're both healed." Edward didn't fully understand what she meant, but he nodded. Looking around, he noticed that the man with the cell phone had disappeared, but other observers remained at a distance, curious and hesitant. "We need to go before this becomes a spectacle," he said, indicating the people watching them. Lily agreed and, without asking permission, sat on Edward's lap, settling in as if it were the most natural place in the world. Her small body hardly weighed anything, and she adjusted herself so as not to hinder the control of the chair. "Ready," she said with a mischievous smile. "Now we're just a father and his daughter returning home." The word father hit Edward like a punch. He had never considered fatherhood, neither before nor after the accident. Children were complications, responsibilities, vulnerabilities that wouldn't fit into his meticulously planned life. But now, with Lily on his lap and the miracle of the 3 steps still reverberating in his body, Edward felt something new arising within him. Something that, like his newly awakened legs, had been dormant for too long. "My house isn't very suitable for children," he commented as he directed the chair out of the park. "I don't have toys or games or colorful things." Lily shrugged, unconcerned. "I don't need toys. I need you, Mr. Edward, and you need me." The declaration, so direct and at the same time so profound, left Edward speechless. They continued in silence to the parking lot, where Anthony waited with the car. The driver widened his eyes at seeing the girl, but didn't ask questions. He just helped Edward transfer to the back seat and stored the chair in the trunk. "Home, sir?" he asked, looking through the rearview mirror. "Yes, Anthony," Edward replied as Lily settled beside him, small and serene like a bird that found a safe branch. Home. The car departed, taking them to the mansion in Highland Heights, to the uncertain future that awaited them, to the next steps of a journey that had just begun. And in his pants pocket, Edward's cell phone was already receiving the first notifications. The video of his 3 miraculous steps was beginning to circulate on social media, spreading like wildfire, setting the stage for what was to come. Lily's arrival at Edward's mansion caused a silent commotion among the staff. Ruth, the housekeeper, widened her eyes at seeing the barefoot girl in simple clothes entering through the main door as if she were an honored guest. Michael, the cook, stopped in the middle of the hallway with a tray in his hands, mouth agape. None of them, however, dared to ask questions. Years working for Edward Morgan had taught everyone that curiosity was not welcome. "Ruth, prepare the guest room in the east wing," ordered Edward, as his chair advanced through the entrance hall with Lily still sitting comfortably on his lap. "The girl will stay with us for a while." Ruth merely nodded, her eyes going from Edward to Lily, trying to decipher the mystery of this unexpected visit. "And prepare a bath and provide some clothes," continued Edward, "something comfortable." Lily observed everything with attentive eyes, absorbing every detail of the mansion, the paintings by renowned artists, the abstract sculptures on marble pedestals, the designer-signed furniture. There was no amazement in her gaze, just a quiet interest, as if she were in a museum. "Your house is beautiful," she commented when they were alone in Edward's office, "but it doesn't seem like a home." The observation, made without malice, hit Edward with surgical precision. It was true. The mansion was a business card, a status symbol, a real estate investment. It had never been thought of as a home, a space of warmth and belonging. "I don't spend much time here," he justified, averting his gaze. "Most of my day is at the office." Lily walked to the huge window that dominated one of the walls, revealing the meticulously maintained garden. "Why do you work so much?" The question, so simple and at the same time so profound, caught Edward off guard. Why indeed? To increase a fortune that was already larger than he could spend in several lifetimes, to prove something to people who didn't really care, to fill the void left by the absence of genuine connections. "It's what I know how to do," he finally replied, the answer sounding weak even to his own ears. Lily didn't insist. She turned her attention to a framed photograph on the desk, the only personal piece in the entire environment. It showed a younger Edward with his parents, in front of a modest house in the outskirts of Columbus. "Are these your parents?" she asked, gently touching the frame. "They were," Edward corrected, the word coming out harsher than he intended. "Both are gone a long time ago." Lily nodded as if she perfectly understood the weight of that loss. "Mine too. That's why we recognize each other." "What do you mean?" "People who have lost their parents. We have a different look, as if we're always looking for something we can no longer find." The observation, coming from such a small child, left Edward speechless. There was a wisdom in her that transcended her age, an understanding of pain that seemed ancestral. Ruth's arrival interrupted the moment. She informed them that the room was ready and the bath prepared. Lily followed the housekeeper, leaving Edward alone with his turbulent thoughts and the legs that still tingled with the memory of the 3 steps in the park. When he found himself alone, Edward finally checked his cell phone. What he saw made his stomach sink. The video of him standing from the chair and taking 3 steps was already on all the major news portals. His name was one of the most commented topics on social media. Journalists were trying to contact him. Concerned friends were sending messages. The holding company's press office was calling incessantly. The caption that accompanied the video on almost all sites was a variation of the same phrase. "Businessman Edward Morgan, paraplegic for 4 years, walks again after meeting with miracle girl." In some videos, his promise could be clearly heard. "If you heal me, this house will be yours." The phrase out of context sounded like a desperate pact, something that Edward Morgan, known for his coldness and rationality, would never make in his right mind. While scrolling through the notifications, a video call from Marcus, his assistant, appeared on the screen. Edward hesitated but answered. "Edward, for God's sake, what's happening?" Marcus's voice was tense, almost hysterical. "Everyone is talking about you, about this mysterious girl, about you walking again. The shareholders are in panic, the press won't stop calling. Even the FBI has contacted us wanting to know if you've been the victim of some scam." Edward took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. How to explain the inexplicable? How to put into rational words something that defied all known logic? "Marcus, calm down. There's no scam. I'm fine, better than ever, actually. But the video, are you really walking? And who is this girl? Is it true that you promised your house to her?" Edward looked through the open door in the direction of the hallway that led to the room where Lily now was. Part of him wanted to deny everything, to return to the safety of his known identity, the pragmatic businessman, the man who didn't believe in miracles. But another part, the one that had taken 3 steps in the park, knew there was no going back. "It's complicated, Marcus. I need time to process all of this." "Time is what we don't have, Edward. The holdings shares fell 7% in the last 2 hours. Investors are concerned about your mental stability. The press is creating increasingly absurd theories. We need an official position now." Edward felt a wave of irritation. The world out there, with its expectations and judgments, suddenly seemed distant and irrelevant. "Tell them I'm fine, that I'm exploring new treatment possibilities, nothing more." "That won't be enough, and you know it." "And what about the girl? Who is she? Why is she with you?" The question touched a sensitive point. Edward didn't have an answer that would satisfy social or legal norms. He couldn't simply say that he had brought an unknown child home because she promised to heal him, because she had made him take 3 miraculous steps, because there was something about her that filled a void he didn't even know existed. "She is my ward," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "I'm helping her temporarily." Marcus seemed on the verge of a nervous collapse. "Edward, you need to understand how this sounds. A single man without children, bringing an unknown child home, and after promising his property to her, people are speculating all kinds of things." "Let them speculate," Edward replied with a coldness that surprised even himself. "I don't owe explanations about my personal life." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Marcus insisting on the need for a press conference, a public explanation, a clear position. Edward, however, remained adamant. When he finally hung up, he felt exhausted, as if he had run a marathon. The cell phone continued to vibrate with new notifications. Edward decided to silence it. The world out there could wait. What mattered now was inside that house, his legs that had awakened and the mysterious girl who had brought this awakening. Using the chair's controls, Edward headed to the room prepared for Lily. As he approached, he heard voices, Lily's, soft and melodious, and Ruth's, deeper and marked by decades of smoking. "And has he always been like this?" Lily's voice was asking. "Not always," Ruth replied. "Before the accident, the boss smiled more. Not a lot, you understand. He was never a man of great demonstrations, but he had a different sparkle in his eyes." And after, an audible sigh. After, it was as if a door closed. He remained efficient, strong even, but something went out. Edward stopped before entering, suddenly feeling like an intruder in a conversation he shouldn't hear. "He's going to walk again," said Lily, with that quiet certainty that characterized her. "How do you know, child?" Ruth's voice was heavy with contained emotion. "Because he's already started. 3 steps today, more tomorrow. And then the world." The silence that followed was dense, loaded with possibilities. Edward felt the tingling in his legs intensify, as if the body itself was responding to Lily's words. Finally, he decided to enter. Ruth was arranging some clothes on the bed, simple dresses, pants, t-shirts, all clearly new, probably bought in haste by some other employee at the housekeeper's request. Lily, with hair still damp from the bath, was sitting in an armchair near the window, wearing a white robe too big for her small body. "I see you've already met Ruth," commented Edward, forcing a casual tone. "She's kind," Lily replied with a smile. "And tells interesting stories about you." Ruth blushed slightly. "Only good things, boss. The girl is curious." Edward nodded, without deepening the subject. "How's the room? Comfortable?" "It's bigger than my aunt's house," Lily replied, looking around, "and quieter." "I'll leave you two alone," said Ruth, heading for the door. Before leaving, however, she stopped beside Edward and, in an unprecedented gesture in years of work, lightly touched his shoulder. "It's good to have new life in this house, boss." When they were alone, Lily stood up and walked to Edward. Without asking permission, she placed her hands on his legs, exactly where the tingling was most intense. "The fear has already arrived," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. Edward nodded, unable to deny. The fear was there. That it was temporary, that it was an illusion, that the world out there would destroy the fragile miracle that was beginning to unfold. "The video is everywhere," he said finally. "People are talking, speculating." Lily didn't seem surprised. "They always talk. It's what people do when they don't understand something. They're questioning who you are, why you're with me." "And what did you answer?" Edward hesitated. "I said you're my ward, that I'm helping you temporarily." Lily nodded, accepting the answer without questioning. Her maturity, so inconsistent with her age, continued to disconcert Edward. "What happens now?" he asked, feeling lost in unknown territory. "Now you decide." "Decide what?" Lily looked at him deeply, her brown eyes shining with an ancient wisdom. "If you're going to embrace the miracle or pretend it never happened." The choice, put with such simplicity, hit Edward like a revelation. That was it, at its core. He could publicly deny, attribute the video to manipulation, return to the safety of his known identity. Or he could accept that something extraordinary was happening, something that defied all logic and science, something that would require courage to be fully embraced. Before he could respond, Edward's cell phone, even on silent, lit up with a call. It was an unknown number, but he answered, moved by an impulse. "Mr. Morgan, this is Raphael Davis from Columbus TV. We're at the door of your house. We'd like a statement about the circulating video, about your apparent miraculous recovery, and about the girl who seems to be with you." Edward froze. The external reality was invading his space with alarming speed. "I have no statements to make at the moment," he replied automatically. "Mr. Morgan, we understand your hesitation, but the public deserves to know the truth. There are those who say you're being deceived, that you're mentally unstable, that you're the victim of an elaborate scam. A simple statement would clarify everything." The emotional. Manipulation was obvious but still effective. Edward felt the irritation grow. "There's no scam. I'm perfectly lucid, and I don't owe explanations about my private life." "And what about the promise to give your house to the girl? Do you confirm? You made that offer?" Edward looked at Lily, who was observing him calmly, without pressure, without expectations. "What happens between me and Lily is our business," he finally replied. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have more important matters to attend to." He hung up before the journalist could insist. Seconds later, the cell phone vibrated again, this time with a message from Anthony, the driver. "Sir, there are several journalists and onlookers at the gate. Security is containing them, but they seem determined. Orders?" Edward felt a wave of claustrophobia. His sanctuary, his private space, was under siege. The world out there demanded explanations he wasn't prepared to give. "We need to get out of here," he said, more to himself than to Lily. "Where to?" she asked without showing concern. Edward thought quickly. He needed a quiet, isolated place where they could be safe from curious looks and insistent questions. A place where he could process everything that was happening, where he could explore the miracle unfolding in his body without the pressure of the outside world. "I have a house in the mountains," he said finally. "In Greenwood, 2 hours from here. Few people know about it." Lily nodded as if that made perfect sense. "When do we leave?" "Immediately. There's no time to lose." With surprising agility, Edward began making arrangements. He called Anthony, instructing him to prepare the car and an alternative route that would avoid the journalists. He asked Ruth to prepare a suitcase for Lily with the new clothes. He directed the security guard to create a distraction at the main gate while they left through the back. In less than 30 minutes, they were ready to depart. Lily, now dressed in a simple dress and sandals, carried a small backpack where she had stored the few personal belongings she had brought from the park, the worn book, some unfinished bracelets, the box with coins. "You're running away," she commented as they waited for Anthony to bring the car to the back entrance. "I'm protecting us," Edward corrected, "from morbid curiosity, from hasty judgments, from malicious speculation." Lily looked at him with those eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. "You're running from yourself, from what you began to feel, from what you began to remember." The observation, as accurate as it was uncomfortable, left Edward without response. There was truth in what she said. It wasn't just from the journalists that he was fleeing, but also from the vulnerability that the miracle had brought with it, from the hope that was beginning to flourish, from the fear that everything would be snatched away again. Anthony arrived with the car, a discreet SUV different from the limousine that Edward normally used. With the driver's help, Edward transferred to the back seat. Lily sat beside him, small and serene as always. "To Greenwood, Anthony," Edward instructed, "by the secondary road, and make sure we're not being followed." The driver nodded and set the car in motion. As they left the mansion through the back, Edward saw in the rearview mirror the crowd that was gathering at the main gate. Journalists with cameras and microphones, onlookers with cell phones in hand, all eager for a glimpse of the man who had begun to walk again and the mysterious miracle girl. Beside him, Lily looked out the window with quiet interest, as if this desperate escape were just another natural chapter in a story she already knew by heart. "Everything will be all right, Mr. Edward," she said, her small voice almost lost in the engine's rumble. "You just need to keep walking." Edward didn't respond. He closed his eyes, feeling the tingling in his legs, the memory of the 3 steps in the park, the weight of the choice he had made by bringing Lily into his life. The car accelerated along the road that led to the mountains, taking them away from the city, from curious gazes, from unanswered questions, to a place where perhaps both could finally begin to walk toward the healing they sought. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The road wound through the Blue Ridge Mountains, revealing breathtaking landscapes at every turn. Deep valleys covered with dense forests, waterfalls plunging down rocky slopes, the intensely blue sky contrasting with the exuberant green. Lily kept her face glued to the window, absorbing every detail with silent fascination. Edward, meanwhile, alternated between frantically checking his cell phone, still flooded with notifications, missed calls, and unread messages, and observing the girl, whose serenity seemed a perfect counterpoint to the storm he felt inside. "Have you come here often?" asked Lily, without taking her eyes off the landscape. "Not as often as I should have," Edward replied, finally putting away his phone. "I bought the house 3 years ago, shortly after the accident. I thought it would be a good place for recovery, away from the curious eyes of the city." "But you never used it for that." It wasn't a question, but a statement. Edward nodded, once again surprised by the girl's sharp perception. "No, I ended up immersing myself in work. It was easier than facing the loneliness, the silence." Lily turned to him, her eyes reflecting the green of the mountains. "Sometimes we need silence to hear what matters." The simplicity of the phrase, pronounced with the quiet wisdom that so disconcerted Edward, made him fall silent, contemplative. The rest of the journey passed in silence, only the sound of the engine and the occasional birdsong penetrating the interior of the vehicle. After almost 2 hours, Anthony turned onto an almost imperceptible dirt road, hidden between century-old trees. The path was steep and irregular, making the car bounce with each meter. "Sorry about the bumps," said Edward to Lily. "The road is purposely poorly maintained. It keeps the curious away." Lily smiled. "It seems like an adventure." After a few more minutes, They reached a clearing where a construction that seemed to grow organically from the terrain stood. It wasn't an opulent mansion like the one in Columbus, but a house of wood and stone with large windows and a porch that surrounded the entire structure. The contemporary architecture harmonized perfectly with the surrounding nature, as if the house were an extension of the forest itself. "Wow!" exclaimed Lily, her eyes shining with admiration. "It looks like it came from a storybook." Edward felt a strange pride in her reaction. It was designed by an architect specializing in bioconstruction. Almost all materials are local or recycled. The car stopped in front of the main entrance. Anthony got out to help Edward with the chair, but was surprised by his boss's firm voice. "I don't need the chair, Anthony. Just bring the luggage." The driver hesitated, confused. "Sir?" "I'm going to try to walk," Edward explained, feeling his heart accelerate with the decision. "With Lily's help." Anthony looked from Edward to the girl, clearly divided between loyalty to his boss and concern for his well-being. "Are you sure, sir? Wouldn't it be more prudent—" "Absolutely sure," interrupted Edward with the firm voice he used to end discussions in board meetings. "Lily, will you help me?" The girl approached the car, extending her small hands. "Always." With careful movements, Edward turned in the seat and positioned his legs outside the car. The tingling intensified, as if each nerve was awakening simultaneously. He breathed deeply, mentally preparing for the effort. "Remember," said Lily, with an almost comical seriousness on her childish face, "it's not the legs that walk, it's you." Edward nodded, understanding the profound meaning behind the simple words. Supporting himself on the car doorframe and on Lily's hands, he rose. For a terrible moment, he thought he would fall. His legs were trembling violently, unaccustomed to the body's weight. But then, as if responding to a silent command, they steadied. He was standing again. Anthony let out an exclamation of astonishment, quickly contained. Edward didn't blame him. It was indeed a scene difficult to believe. The man who for 4 years had depended on a wheelchair was now standing, supported only by his own legs and the tiny hands of a child. Now, one step at a time, guided, Lily beginning to slowly back away, still holding Edward's hands. The first step was hesitant, awkward, more of a drag than properly a step. The second was a bit firmer. On the third, Edward was already beginning to remember the rhythm, the cadence of walking. On the fourth, he felt a growing confidence. On the fifth, something like joy sprouted in his chest, a sensation so strange and at the same time so familiar that it almost made him cry. In slow but progressively more confident movements, Edward walked the 10 meters that separated the car from the house entrance. When he finally reached the door, he was panting, sweaty, with legs aching from the unusual effort, but immensely satisfied with himself. "You did it!" exclaimed Lily, her face illuminated by a genuine smile. "More steps than yesterday." Edward nodded, unable to speak. Emotion formed a knot in his throat, something he hadn't experienced since when? He couldn't remember the last time. He had felt such emotional intensity. Anthony approached, carrying the luggage and unable to hide his amazement. "Sir, it's a miracle." Edward finally found his voice. "Yes, Anthony, it's exactly that." The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior, spacious yet cozy, with dark wood furniture, natural fiber rugs, large cushions strategically scattered on the floor. The huge windows framed the spectacular view of the mountains, bringing nature inside. The late afternoon light penetrated through the glass, painting the environment with golden tones. "This house has soul," commented Lily, exploring every corner with reverent curiosity. "Unlike the other one." Edward silently agreed. It was true. Unlike the mansion in Columbus built to impress, this house had been designed to welcome. It was a reflection of an Edward that had briefly existed after the accident, a man in search of healing and peace, before pragmatism and coldness engulfed him again. "Anthony, you can return to Columbus," said Edward, leaning on one of the wooden pillars. "I'll call when we need to return." The driver hesitated. "Are you sure, sir, you'll be completely isolated here? And with your condition—" "My condition is improving, as you yourself saw," interrupted Edward, with a smile that surprised them both. "Besides, we're not completely isolated. There's a caretaker who looks after the property, Mr. Jack. He lives in the small house near the orchard and comes to check everything twice a day." Reluctantly, Anthony nodded and said goodbye. When the sound of the engine disappeared in the distance, Edward and Lily found themselves alone, surrounded only by the silence of the mountain and the occasional bird song. "And now?" asked Lily, looking small and vulnerable in the middle of the spacious living room. "Now we rest," Edward replied, feeling fatigue weigh on him like a lead blanket. The effort of walking, added to the emotional tension of the last 24 hours, had drained his energies. "And tomorrow we continue our journey." Lily nodded, satisfied with the answer. They went to the upper floor, Edward climbing the stairs with extreme slowness, leaning heavily on the handrail but determined not to use the wheelchair that Anthony had left, folded in the entrance hall. Lily walked beside him, patient, offering support not only physical but mainly emotional, with her calm and confident presence. The master bedroom was spacious, with a king-size bed, a gas fireplace, and a private balcony that offered a panoramic view of the valley. Edward showed Lily the adjacent room, smaller but equally comfortable, originally intended for guests who never came. "Rest a bit," he said. "We'll explore more later." Lily agreed and retired to the room, leaving Edward finally alone with his turbulent thoughts. Exhausted, he let himself fall on the bed, feeling every muscle protest against the unusual effort. The cell phone vibrated in his pocket. Another notification, another demand from the outside world. Without looking, he turned off the device. The universe out there could wait. When he woke up hours later, night had already fallen. The silvery light of the full moon penetrated through the windows, bathing the room in an ethereal luminosity. Edward sat up in bed, surprised that he had slept so deeply. He hadn't had such periods of uninterrupted sleep since before the accident. He stood up, marveling at the way his legs responded, still hesitant, still trembling, but increasingly coordinated. He walked to the balcony and opened the doors, letting the fresh mountain air invade the room. The view was breathtaking. The valley below, bathed in moonlight, seemed like a fantasy world, an enchanted realm distant from human concerns. A soft noise attracted his attention. Lily was on the adjacent balcony, looking at the same valley, her small profile cut out against the darkness. Edward hesitated, not wanting to invade her moment of contemplation, but something impelled him to approach. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he asked, leaning on the divider that separated the two balconies. Lily turned, showing no surprise at his presence. "It's as if we could see infinity from here." Edward smiled. There was something about the way Lily expressed herself, in the wisdom contained in simple phrases, that touched a part of him he thought long buried. "Have you always been like this?" he asked, curiosity finally overcoming reserve. "So, aware?" Lily tilted her head, thoughtful. "I don't know how to be any other way. People always say I'm strange. Different." "Different is good," Edward replied, surprising himself with the statement. When had he begun to value difference, originality? He who had spent his life trying to fit into the molds of corporate success, social acceptance, predictable normality. "You're different too," observed Lily. "You just forgot how to be." The observation, so simple and at the same time so profound, hit Edward like a revelation. It was true. There had been a time before the crushing responsibilities, before the suffocating expectations, before the armor of coldness he had built around himself, when he had been different, dreamer, authentic, alive. "How do you know these things, Lily?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. "How do you know what to say, what to do, how to help me walk again?" Lily smiled, a smile that seemed to contain ancient secrets. "I just help remember. You already know all this. You just forgot." They remained silent for a few moments, contemplating the valley bathed in silver light, each lost in their own thoughts. It was Lily who finally broke the silence. "I'm hungry," she said, with the direct simplicity of childhood. Edward laughed, a sound that surprised them both. When was the last time he had laughed like this, spontaneously, without reservations? "Me too," he admitted. "Let's see what we have in the kitchen." The descent down the stairs was easier than the climb, although it still required concentration and effort. Lily walked beside Edward, not offering physical help but a comforting presence, a silent anchor in the new world of sensations and possibilities that was opening up to him. The kitchen, like the rest of the house, was a welcoming space with dark wood cabinets, a large central island and a rustic table near the window. To Edward's surprise, the pantry and refrigerator were well stocked. Fresh fruits, vegetables, breads, cheeses, everything meticulously organized. "Mr. Jack must have prepared everything," commented Edward, remembering the discreet caretaker, who had looked after the property for years. "He always keeps the house ready, even when I go months without coming." Lily explored the kitchen with childish curiosity, opening cabinets, examining utensils, discovering hidden culinary treasures. She found a pot of honey, which she raised with bright eyes. "Can we make tea with honey?" she asked hopefully. "My grandmother made it when I needed strength." Edward noticed the hesitation, the near slip. "Your grandmother? I thought you lived with your aunt." Lily lowered her eyes, suddenly interested in her own bare feet. "My grandmother passed away when I was 7. It was after that I went to live with my aunt." The mention of loss touched something in Edward. He too knew the pain of losing loved ones, of seeing his world collapse, of needing to rebuild himself from the rubble. "Tea with honey sounds perfect," he said, letting the subject drift to safer territory. While the water boiled, Lily sat at the table, drawing invisible patterns on the wood with her fingers. Edward observed her, trying to unravel the mystery that was this child. Who was she really? Where did she come from? How had she developed that ancient wisdom, that ability to heal, to see beyond appearances? "You have questions," said Lily, without raising her eyes. "Many." Edward smiled, no longer so surprised by her ability to read his thoughts. "I do, but I don't know where to start." "The beginning is always good," she replied, raising her eyes to meet his. "Ask what you really want to know." Edward took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. "Who are you, Lily? Really?" The girl seemed to weigh the question, considering it carefully. "I'm just Lily, a girl who sees what others don't see, who helps remember what was forgotten." "And how did you do this?" Edward gestured to his own legs. "How did you make me walk again?" Lily smiled, a smile that mixed innocence and wisdom. "I didn't make you walk. You could always walk. You had just forgotten how. But the doctors said it was impossible." The spinal cord injury." "Doctors see the body," interrupted Lily gently. "I see beyond." The kettle whistled, interrupting the conversation. Edward prepared tea for both, adding a generous spoonful of honey to each cup. When he returned to the table, Lily was looking out the window, her small profile cut out against the darkness of the night. "Why me?" asked Edward, placing the cup in front of her. "Why did you choose to help me?" Lily blew on the tea before answering. "You weren't chosen. We met because we needed to. You needed to remember how to walk. I needed a place to stay." The simplicity of the answer disconcerted Edward. There was no grand cosmic plan, no divine intervention, just the meeting of two souls in need, each with something to offer the other. "And after?" he asked, feeling vulnerable. "When I'm fully recovered and you no longer need a place to stay." Lily looked at him with those eyes that seemed to contain universes. "Then we'll discover together, one step at a time." The answer, although it didn't offer concrete guarantees, reassured Edward in a way he couldn't explain. There was wisdom in that approach, living in the present moment, facing each challenge as it arose, without getting lost in anxieties about an uncertain future. They finished their tea in contemplative silence, both lost in their own thoughts. When Lily finally yawned, Edward realized how late it was. "Time to sleep," he said, standing up carefully. "Tomorrow will be a new day." Lily nodded, rubbing her sleepy eyes. A day of more steps. They climbed the stairs together, Edward moving with surprising grace considering the short time since he had begun to walk again. In the hallway, Lily stopped in front of her room door. "Mr. Edward?" "Yes?" "Thank you for bringing me here. It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen." The sincere gratitude in her voice touched something deep in Edward. "I'm the one who should thank you, Lily, for everything." She smiled, a luminous smile that seemed to illuminate the dark hallway. "Good night. Dream of new paths." "Good night, little one." When Lily closed the door, Edward remained in the hallway for a few moments, absorbing everything that had happened in the last 2 days. His life, so meticulously controlled, so predictable in its routine of work and isolation, had been completely transformed. And strangely, he didn't feel fear of this transformation. For the first time in years, he felt alive. Truly alive. In his room, Edward walked to the balcony and looked at the valley bathed in moonlight. The world out there, with its demands and judgments, its expectations and pressures, seemed distant, almost unreal. Here in this mountain refuge, with Lily and the miracle unfolding in his body, he felt connected to something greater, something he had forgotten a long time ago, something that perhaps could be called hope. Meanwhile, far away in the bustling city, the story of the businessman who had begun to walk again and the mysterious miracle girl continued to spread. Journalists investigated, experts debated, internet users speculated. The video of the 3 steps had been viewed millions of times, analyzed frame by frame, questioned and defended with equal fervor. No one knew where Edward and Lily were. No one fully understood what had happened. But everyone felt instinctively that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that defied conventional logic, something that touched that part of the human soul that still believes in miracles. And as Edward fell asleep, feeling the tingling in his legs like a promise of renewal, social media exploded with the hashtag #YourMiracleGirl, transforming Lily, the small girl in a saffron-colored dress, into a symbol of hope for a world hungry to believe in something beyond the ordinary. The following days passed at their own rhythm, different from the frantic acceleration that dominated Edward's life in Columbus. In the mountain house, time seemed to flow more slowly, more consciously, as if each moment deserved to be lived in its fullness. Every morning, Edward woke up to the birds singing. His first action of the day was to stand up, test his legs, marvel at the growing strength he felt in them. Then, he would go to the balcony, breathe in the pure mountain air, and watch the sun rising behind the distant peaks, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. Lily was usually already awake, sitting on her room's balcony or exploring the garden that surrounded the house. She had an infinite curiosity about nature. She would observe ants for hours, talk to birds as if they could understand her, collect interesting leaves and stones that she carefully stored in a small box she had improvised. The exercises had become a daily ritual. Edward walked around the house, then through the garden, each day a little farther, a little more firmly. Lily accompanied him in silence, offering support not with empty words of encouragement, but with her quiet presence, her unwavering confidence in his progress. "You're getting stronger," she commented on the morning of the 5th day as they walked along the trail that circled the property. "Soon you won't need me anymore." The statement, said naturally, caused a pang of anguish in Edward. It was true, his recovery was progressing at a pace that defied all medical expectations. The spasms had given way to controlled movements. The tingling had transformed into normal sensitivity. The muscles, atrophied from disuse, were gaining volume and definition each day. "I still need you," he replied, surprising himself with the honesty of the statement. "Not just for walking?" Lily smiled, a smile that illuminated her small face. "I know, but it's good to hear." The connection that had formed between them was something Edward had never experienced before. It wasn't fatherhood in the conventional sense, nor friendship in the common sense. It was something deeper, more essential, as if their souls recognized each other from some previous existence. During the afternoons, While Lily rested or read her worn books, Edward allowed himself limited contact with the outside world. He would turn on his cell phone for an hour, answer the most urgent emails, briefly talk with Marcus about critical issues of the holding. The media storm had not diminished. On the contrary, in the absence of concrete information, speculation was becoming increasingly extravagant. Some outlets talked about miraculous healing, others about elaborate fraud. There were those who suggested that Lily was some kind of medium or a child with paranormal gifts. Others, more skeptical, insinuated that Edward had never really been paralyzed, that it was all just a publicity stunt. "We need an official position, Edward," Marcus insisted in each conversation. "The shareholders are restless. Business partners demand explanations. The press gives us no respite." "I'm not ready," Edward invariably replied. "I need more time." The truth, which he hardly admitted even to himself, was that he feared the world out there. He feared the scrutiny, the judgment, the need to explain the inexplicable. Here in the mountain refuge, with only Lily and the occasional Jack as company, he could experience the miracle on his own terms, without the pressure. To rationalize it. It was on the night of the 6th day that everything changed. Edward and Lily were on the main balcony, observing the stars that seemed infinitely closer and brighter at the mountain's altitude. The air was fresh, with a slight aroma of pine trees and moist earth. Lily had taught Edward to identify some constellations, knowledge she attributed to an astronomy book she had once found in a public library. "That's the Big Dipper," she pointed, her small finger tracing invisible patterns in the sky. "And there, see that group of stars that looks like a W? That's Cassiopeia." Edward followed the indications, marveled not only by the starry sky, but by the way Lily made him see the world with new eyes, as if everything were a constant discovery, an endless adventure. "Lily," he said suddenly, "who are you really?" The question hung in the air for a few moments. Lily looked at him, her eyes reflecting the brightness of the stars. "You've asked that before," she replied with a soft smile, "and you never really answered." Lily sighed, a small sound too old for her childish body. "Because some questions don't have simple answers, or perhaps the answer is so simple that people find it difficult to believe." Edward waited, feeling that something important was about to be revealed. "I'm just Lily," she continued, looking back at the sky. "A girl who sees what others have forgotten how to see, who feels what others have forgotten how to feel, who remembers what's important when the world gets too noisy for people to hear." "And the miracle? How did you make me walk again?" Lily shook her head, a gesture that mixed exasperation and affection. "You still don't understand, Mr. Edward. I didn't do any miracle. You healed yourself, alone. But the doctors said it was impossible. The spinal cord injury—" "Doctors know a lot about bodies," interrupted Lily gently, "but little about souls. You didn't walk because you believed you couldn't walk, because you had accepted that this was your life now, because it was easier to build a fortress around your heart than to face the pain of trying and failing." The words hit Edward like a revelation. There was truth in them, a truth that he intuited but had never dared to confront directly. "So, you just made me believe?" Lily smiled, a smile that contained universes. "I just reminded you of who you really are. The rest was up to you." A noise on the road interrupted the conversation, the unmistakable sound of an engine climbing the steep trail that led to the house. Edward felt his heart race. They weren't expecting visitors, and very few people knew of the existence of this refuge. "Someone found us," he said, feeling a wave of anxiety. The outside world was invading his sanctuary. Lily didn't seem surprised or concerned. "It was time," she said simply. Before Edward could question what she meant, headlights illuminated the property entrance. It was Anthony's car, and beside it, another vehicle, a dark sedan that Edward recognized as belonging to Richard, his physiotherapist. "What are they doing here?" he murmured, half to himself. "They came to help," Lily replied, with that quiet certainty that characterized her. "You're ready now." Edward didn't have time to question. Anthony and Richard were already getting out of the cars, and with them a third person, Marcus, his assistant, seeming simultaneously relieved and apprehensive. "Edward," called Marcus, approaching the balcony. Then he stopped, mouth agape, at seeing his boss standing without support beside the mysterious girl about whom so much was speculated. "It's true, then," he murmured, visibly paling. "You really are walking." Edward felt a strange calm replace the initial anxiety. It was as if a cycle were completing itself, as if this moment were inevitable and somehow necessary. "Yes, Marcus," he replied, his voice firm. "I'm walking, and getting better every day." Richard approached, his professional eyes evaluating the posture, the balance, the weight, distribution in Edward's legs. "This is extraordinary, scientifically impossible, but undeniably real." Edward smiled, a smile that mixed pride and humility. "Science still has much to learn, Richard. We all do." Marcus recovered from the initial shock and assumed his usual role as spokesperson for practical concerns. "Edward, the situation in Columbus is unsustainable. The press is camping in front of your house and the holdings office. Shareholders demand an official position. There are rumors of all kinds circulating. We need you there." Edward felt Lily lightly touch his arm, a discreet but comforting gesture. "I know, Marcus, and I'm ready to return." The declaration surprised everyone, including himself, but it was true. The time in the mountain refuge had served its purpose. He was physically stronger, emotionally more centered, spiritually more connected. He was ready to face the world out there with all its questions, its judgments, its expectations. "Tomorrow," he continued, feeling strangely light with the decision. "Tomorrow we'll return to Columbus and I'll make an official statement." Marcus seemed relieved but still concerned. "And what about her?" he asked, indicating Lily with a discreet movement of his head. Edward looked at the girl beside him, so small and at the same time so strong, so young and at the same time so wise. "Lily comes with me, of course. She's part of all this." Anthony, who until then had observed everything in respectful silence, discreetly cleared his throat. "Sir, I brought something that might interest you. It was in the mailbox at the mansion." He extended an official envelope with the letterhead of the family court. Edward felt his heart race. He opened the envelope with trembling fingers, quickly read the contents. "What is it?" asked Marcus, noticing the change in Edward's expression. "The preliminary authorization for the guardianship process," Edward replied, his voice heavy with emotion. "Apparently, someone from my legal team continued the process, even with my absence." He looked at Marcus, who averted his gaze, a slight blush, denouncing his responsibility in the matter. "I thought it would be important," justified the assistant, "especially considering all the speculation about your relationship." Edward felt a wave of gratitude. Behind Marcus's professional efficiency, there was a genuine concern, a care that transcended the work relationship. "Thank you," he said, simply. Lily, who had remained silent during the entire conversation, finally spoke. "Does this mean I can stay with you, officially?" The question, asked with a vulnerability she rarely demonstrated, reminded everyone that despite her unusual wisdom, Lily was still a child who, as Edward would later discover, had lost her parents in tragic circumstances and had lived among distant relatives and temporary shelters, developing her peculiar wisdom as a survival mechanism in a world that frequently failed the most vulnerable. "Yes, Lily," Edward replied, kneeling to be at her eye level. "If you want, this is just the first step. We can make it permanent. You can have a home with me." Lily's eyes shone with contained tears, the first demonstration of truly childish emotion that Edward had witnessed in her. "I would like that," she said, her voice small but firm. "Very much." Edward hugged her, feeling the physical fragility of that small body and at the same time the immense strength of the soul that inhabited it. In that moment, he fully understood what Lily had tried to teach him from the beginning, that the true miracle wasn't in his legs beginning to function again, but in his heart relearning to feel. The next morning, the caravan departed back to Columbus. Edward, at Richard's insistence, used the wheelchair to descend the steep trail, but everyone knew it was just a temporary precaution. His legs responded better and better, his muscles were strengthening, his confidence was growing. formal medicine, still didn't explain how this was possible, but the reality was undeniable. Edward Morgan was recovering from an injury that all specialists had declared permanent. The return journey was quieter than the outward one. Lily observed the landscape with attentive eyes, occasionally pointing out some rare bird or interesting rock formation. Edward responded, engaging in that world of continuous discoveries that she inhabited so naturally. As they approached Columbus, the reality of what awaited them began to weigh. Edward knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be questions, skepticism, perhaps even accusations. The story of a billionaire businessman who begins to walk, again after meeting a mysterious girl in a park, was too sensational not to arouse all kinds of reactions. "You're worried," observed Lily, not as a question, but as a statement. Edward nodded, finding himself unable to lie to those eyes that seemed to see directly into his soul. "Many people will want explanations that I don't know if I can give." "Then give the truth," Lily replied with simplicity. "That you're healing, that you're relearning to walk, not just with your legs, but with your heart." Edward smiled, marveling once again at the wisdom contained in this child. "And what about you? People will ask many questions about you too." Lily shrugged, a strangely adult gesture in her childish body. "People have always asked questions about me. They've always thought I'm strange, different. I'm used to it." There was a resignation in those words that broke Edward's heart. How many times had that child had to face curious looks, whispers behind her back, hasty judgments? How many times had she felt alone in her difference, in her unique perception of the world? "You're not alone anymore," he said, holding her small hand. "We're in this together now." Lily smiled, a smile that illuminated her face like the rising sun. "I know. That's why the miracle worked." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning. Edward then understood what was perhaps the deepest lesson of this entire journey, that true healing doesn't come from outside, but from within. That genuine connection is the greatest catalyst for transformation. That believing, truly, believing is the first step to any miracle. When they arrived at the mansion in Highland Heights, they were received by a crowd, journalists, onlookers, some even with signs expressing support or skepticism. Edward felt his body tense, his breathing accelerate. But then he felt Lily's hand in his, small but firm, anchored and anchoring. "One step at a time," she murmured, just for him to hear, "like in the park." Edward nodded, taking a deep breath. With a sudden decision, he asked Anthony to stop the car a few meters from the main gate. "What are you going to do?" asked Marcus, alarmed. "What I should have done from the beginning," Edward replied. "Face the truth, all of it." With deliberate movements, he transferred himself from the seat to the wheelchair they had brought. Anthony helped him descend from the car, positioning the chair on the sidewalk. Lily got out right after, placing herself beside Edward like a small guardian. The crowd stirred at seeing them. Cameras were raised, voices elevated. Edward ignored all this. He looked at Lily, who nodded encouragingly. Then, before dozens of witnesses, he stood up from the chair. The silence that followed was absolute. No one breathed, no one moved. It was as if time had frozen. With deliberate steps, still a bit hesitant but firm, Edward walked to the mansion's gate. Lily at his side, her presence a constant source of strength and courage. "Mr. Morgan," shouted a journalist, breaking the stunned silence, "is it true that the girl healed you?" Edward stopped, turning to the crowd. He felt a surprising calm, as if the entire path to here, the accident, the years in a wheelchair, the meeting with Lily, the steps in the park, the days in the mountains, had been preparation for this moment. "The truth," he said, his voice clear and strong, "is more complex and simpler than anyone could imagine. I am healing, yes, and Lily was essential in this process. But not in the way you think." He paused, carefully choosing his next words. "What Lily gave me wasn't a physical miracle, but something much more valuable. The courage to believe again, in myself, in the possibility of healing, in life beyond the limitations I myself had accepted." The crowd murmured, some expressions skeptical, others moved. Edward continued. Science still can't fully explain what's happening with my body, but medicine has countless documented cases of inexplicable recoveries, of healings that defy prognoses. The human spirit is more powerful than any of us fully understands. A respectful silence followed his words. It was Lily who broke it, her voice small but clear. We all have the power to heal. Ourselves and others. We just forgot how to use it. The profound simplicity of that statement resonated among those present. Edward saw tears in the eyes of some journalists, emotional smiles on previously skeptical faces. "And what about the promise?" shouted another reporter. "Is it true that you promised your house to her?" Edward smiled, looking at Lily with affection. "I promised much more than a house. I promised a home. And it's a promise I intend to keep with all the legal formalities." He extended the envelope that Anthony had given him in the mountains. "We've already started the legal guardianship process. If all goes well, and if Lily so desires, this process will evolve into full adoption." The revelation caused a new buzz. Edward raised his hand, asking for silence. "I know there are still many questions, and I promise to answer all of them at the appropriate time. But now, we need time and privacy to continue this healing process, physical and emotional." With these words, and ignoring the journalist's shouts for more information, Edward and Lily entered through the mansion's gates, which closed behind them with a metallic click. In the spacious, well-maintained garden, away from curious gazes, Edward knelt to be at Lily's eye level. "You were incredible out there," he said, with genuine admiration. Lily smiled, that smile that seemed to illuminate the world around her. "You too. You spoke from the heart. It's the only truth that matters." Edward felt a wave of emotion so intense it almost knocked him down. He hugged Lily, feeling in that small body a strength that defied all logic, all expectation, all limits. "Welcome home, Lily," he whispered, his voice choked. "Welcome back, Mr. Edward," she replied, her thin arms embracing him with surprising strength. To life. In the months that followed, the story of Edward and Lily continued to fascinate the country. Doctors studied his case, spiritualists offered interpretations, skeptics looked for flaws in the narrative. But the reality was undeniable. Edward Morgan, given as permanently paralyzed after a traumatic accident, was walking again, each day with more strength and grace. The holding, initially shaken by its president's apparent instability, quickly recovered when it became clear that Edward was more lucid and focused than ever. The shares rose, new contracts were signed, an aura of rebirth enveloped all the group's companies. But the most significant change wasn't in the numbers, in the financial statements, or in the newspaper headlines. It was in the man that Edward was becoming. More compassionate, more present, more connected with what really mattered. The calculated coldness that had characterized him for years gave way to inspiring leadership that valued not only results, but people. In the Highland Heights mansion, once so cold and impersonal, flowers appeared in previously empty vases, books occupied previously decorative shelves, laughter echoed through previously silent hallways. The house was transforming into a home, just as its owner was transforming into a more complete human being. Lily flourished in this environment. Enrolled in a progressive school that valued her sensitivity and unique intelligence, she developed friendships, explored talents, expanded horizons. Her ancient wisdom remained, but now balanced by the simple joy of being a child, of playing, learning, growing, surrounded by affection and security. The adoption process advanced, with the enthusiastic support of social workers who visited the house and witnessed the extraordinary bond between Edward and Lily. There were obstacles, of course, questions about the unusual circumstances of the meeting, about the capacity of a single and busy man to raise a child, about the impact of media exposure on Lily's development. But with each visit, each interview, each evaluation, it became more evident that this unlikely union was, in fact, perfectly complementary. Two beings who, in some mysterious way, had been destined to heal each other. On a spring afternoon, almost a year after that first meeting in Brookside Park, Edward and Lily walked side by side along the same trail where everything had begun. Edward moved with ease, only a slight limp denouncing the long battle his body had fought to recover. Lily skipped beside him, occasionally stopping to examine a flower, observe an insect, contemplate the sky. Under the same oak tree where Lily had set up her miracle office, they stopped. Edward looked at the century-old tree, then at the girl beside him, feeling a gratitude so deep that words seemed insufficient to express it. "This is where it all began," he said finally. Lily nodded, her eyes scanning the place as if revisiting a precious memory. "You were so sad that day, so closed, like a flower that forgot how to open to the sun." Edward smiled, touched by the precision of the metaphor. "And you reminded me." "We reminded each other," Lily corrected, with that wisdom that continued to surprise him. "Of how it is to love, of how it is to trust, of how it is to walk not just with the legs, but with the heart." Edward knelt, getting at her eye level. From his coat pocket, he took a small velvet case. He opened it, revealing a delicate pendant, a silver crescent moon studded with a single stone that shone with shades of blue and green, like the sea that Edward had returned to visit, now with Lily at his side. "Today marks 1 year since we met," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "And it's also the day the judge signed the final papers. You are, officially and forever, my daughter." Lily's eyes filled with tears, not the contained tears of someone who has known too much pain, but the liberating tears of someone who has finally found their place in the world. "Dad," she said, testing the word that, until then, she had rarely used. "My dad." Edward placed the pendant around her neck, his hands trembling slightly with the emotion of the moment. "Forever, Lily. That's a promise that will never be broken." They embraced under the oak tree, father and daughter united by something deeper than blood, more powerful than legal documents, more true than any rational explanation for the miracle they had lived together. And in that moment, observed only by the birds and the wind that whispered among the leaves, both understood the truth that had been there from the beginning, that the true miracle had never been Edward's physical recovery, but the recovery of his ability to love, to trust, to open himself to the possibility of a life beyond the limitations he himself had imposed on his heart. Lily, with her ancient wisdom in a child's body, had been the catalyst. But the miracle had always been within him, just waiting to be awakened. As they walked back hand in hand under the afternoon sun that painted the park with golden tones, Edward reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them here. From a casual meeting under an oak tree to a family united by bonds that transcended any conventional explanation. And he realized with crystal clarity that the promise made on that first day, "If you heal me, this house will be yours," had been fulfilled in ways he could never have imagined, because Lily had